Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, PJM's auction results capitalize on a landmark opportunity. My name is Tyann Herrer, and I'm moderating today's webinar. During our time together today, we'll discuss the results of PJM's 2025-2026 Base Residual Auction, also known as the BRA, and what your organization can expect as a result of the auction outcomes and the significant opportunity available to you to offset rising capacity charges with demand response participation. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'd like to introduce our two speakers today. First, we have Kate Moulton, who serves as Regional Business Development Manager for PJM here at Enel North America. In her role, she helps customers discover the benefits of DR for their business and community. Kate has been with Enel for over 10 years, focusing the majority of her time on PJM. She spent 8 of those years on account management team working with existing sites in PJM. Kate is joined here today by Ian Will, who is a Customer Success Manager for all PJM-based DR programs here at Enel. In his role, he is responsible for the successful execution of these programs from a market-facing, operational, and customer-centric lens. He's been with Enel for almost 10 years. Next slide, please. Here is what Kate and Ian will be sharing with you in our webinar today. First, we'll review what demand response is and its importance to the BRA. Then we'll review the auction results, the factors that led to them, and provide some insight into where PJM is headed in the market. Then, most importantly, and probably the reason many of you are here today, we'll discuss strategic steps your organization can take based on these auctions results. Now, I'll send it over to Kate.
Thank you, Tyann, for the introduction. And also thank you everyone for joining today. It's a super exciting time in PJM, and I'm truly really looking forward to sharing some of the recent insights with you on the webinar today. So before we get started, I wanted to give a general high-level overview of who we are as a company for folks on the line who may not be familiar with Enel. So just a few fast facts here for Enel. Enel North America combines the spirit of a startup with the infrastructure and expertise of a global innovator. Our parent organization, the Enel Group, is a multinational power company and leading player in the world's power markets. We are a Fortune 100 energy leader that holds the world's largest demand response portfolio. With that portfolio, we are able to lend scale, expertise, and financial stability to our customers within North America. With sustainability being at the center of our business model for several years now, we are enabling businesses and communities of all sizes to manage their energy more efficiently and more strategically. Next slide. Now, what is exactly PJM? Some of you on this call may already have an idea, some folks may not. To break it down, PJM is the largest electric grid operator in the United States. It is a regional transmission organization, also known as RTO, that coordinates the movement of wholesale electricity across 13 states and the District of Columbia. Where does Enel fit in with all of that? Enel has an extremely large footprint in PJM, an 18-year track record to be exact. Over those years, we have provided demand response programs, peak prediction, and backup generator upgrade services throughout the entire PJM market. More than 3,000 PJM customers are currently trusting Enel as their demand response partner for the current 24-25 season that we're in right now. And as stated here in the slide, there are some PJM fast facts. PJM currently serves more than 65 million people. The 2025 PJM peak demand forecast is 153,883 megawatts. And their 2025 demand response capacity is 6,065 megawatts. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are on this webinar not familiar with demand response, let's talk a little bit about what DR, demand response, is and how it works with the base residual auction. Next slide. So what is demand response? Demand response is a program, very simply put, that pays facilities to curtail their electricity usage to stabilize the grid during times of extreme strain. That could be anything from weather disturbances, energy pricing, or unexpected system issues like downed transmission lines. These are all demand response events or dispatches. At the end of the day, it's much more efficient for grid operators like PJM to pay large energy users to use less energy than for them to construct peaking power plants. Those power plants would sit idle nearly all year and just turn on for 2 to 3 hours during an emergency event. Participating in demand response not only gives organizations the opportunity to earn a revenue stream through the events and audits, but it also allows them to protect their equipment from brownouts or blackouts or voltage constraints if the system-wide strain continues to escalate. Next slide, please. By participating in demand response programs and curtailing electricity, there are much further benefits than just earning payments. Customers are also strengthening the grid and increasing sustainability while improving their own operational reliability. So if you look at the slide here, this is showing the comparison of the energy demand on a given day versus the available generation supply and capacity. So the highlighted red days are showing demand nearly exceeding 100% of the supply that's available. These are the situations that can ultimately cause a blackout on the electricity grid. Aside from those summer highlighted days, you're able to see how rare it is for a given day to cross that dangerous threshold. It's an indicator of how important and how vital demand response is. More than 10% of grid infrastructure costs are spent to meet that peak demand, which occurs less than 1% of the time. So, all in all, if you're able to be flexible with your load when called upon for a demand response event, you can help decrease emissions and help the grid remain reliable for your local community. Next slide. So, getting into the acts of how demand response work and how are you as a possible participant going to enroll and act. So there are 3 phases to a demand response event. First, when an event is called, the facility is notified and an event is taking place. When we tailor the energy reduction plan specific to your site, we will also have a list of site contacts that would be involved in the curtailment process. And that is something that we work and tailor, again, specifically to your facility. Second, the facility responds to an event by curtailing load or shifting load to a generator. Again, whatever we have already predetermined months before. And third, the facility is notified that the event is over and can return operation to normal levels. For customers, before we even get into how you enroll, for customers to actually enroll in the demand response program as an active participant, they first need to secure and lock down their spot in the market. In PJM, that all starts at the base residual auction. And I'll get into it a little bit further, but the base residual auction is not something you are participating in, but we are participating as an aggregator to you. So as stated in the slide here, the BRA is a capacity auction held by PJM, typically 3 years before the delivery year. It shapes PJM region's electricity mix and ensures that there is enough power supply to meet electricity demand across its entire footprint. In the auction, PJM will project the capacity that they need to ensure sufficient demand-side resources, including assets like demand response, to meet peak load requirements and enhance grid reliability. Then, resources, including demand response aggregators like Enel North America, bid in the auction to provide that needed capacity. These aggregators then fulfill their capacity commitment by enrolling companies, facilities, organizations who want to participate in demand response. In addition to bidders securing capacity, the BRA also sets the clearing price that demand response participants are paid for by participating in this emergency load response program, this demand response program run by PJM. Clearing in this context means that the auction successfully matched the supply of electricity with the demand. And the price at which this matching occurred is then the clearing price. One more note to point out, for PJM energy customers, the BRA will also set your future prices for capacity charges on your electricity bill. Next slide. Folks who are familiar with demand response and the base residual auction might know and be aware of the fact that the delays were indeed a little bit delayed for the 2025-2026 program year. Historically, as I mentioned in the previous slide, they were taking place 3 years in advance and on schedule. Because the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, also known as FERC, was working through some approvals of new capacity market rules that were brought up by PJM, there were delays, which anyone could understand why in that sense to kind of change the market and change the reforms. That is, I will say, planning to get back on schedule onto that 3-year forward schedule. The next auction for the 2026 delivery year is already on the books to be scheduled and occur for this December. So December 2024, shockingly a few months away. And the 3-year in advance is planning on getting back fully to its normal schedule in May of 2026. We're hopeful that we're going to stay on track here, but nothing is obviously guaranteed and everything's always subject to change. But we are hopeful that we're going in the right direction. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Ian to review the base residual auction results.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Kate. Yeah, so let's get into why most of us are probably here today to review the most recent BRA results. So at the end of July, PJM released the results of this auction, which secured capacity and determined prices for June 1st of next year through May 31st, 2026. And to say the results were surprising is an understatement. They shattered all expectations and sent shockwaves throughout the region. They also sent a clear signal to participants in the energy industry that PJM does not have enough supply to meet their growing demand for electricity, and that more flexible resources are needed to ensure supply and demand remain balanced, which in turn keeps the grid stable. Now, as part of this, capacity charges on bills are expected to increase, but you can offset these costs through demand response participation, which Kate spoke to a little bit earlier. And conversely, the reward for successful DR participation has increased exponentially from what it was a year ago. Now, digging into some of the details of this auction, almost 136,000 megawatts of capacity cleared, with a wide range of resources making up that mix. Now, grids like PJM need a diverse set of flexible resources to ensure they can meet the needs of energy users in their area of responsibility. They also need to make sure they have a reserve margin, or sort of a cushion of electricity being generated, so they don't run the risk of running out of power when it's needed. DR remains a critical reliability resource to the grid. In fact, in this auction, DR comprised about 5% of the resource mix, clearing around 6,000 megawatts of capacity in total. However, the auction for the 24-25 delivery year, the year we're currently in, about 149,000 megawatts of capacity cleared, which comes out to about 13,000 fewer megawatts procured at this most recent auction. Less capacity secured at auction means less supply. So pricing wise, it comes down to the basics of economics. When supply falls, prices rise. And as you can see plainly in the bar, we can see that plainly in the bar chart on this slide. Pricing across the RTO parent zone, which is the majority of PJM territory, skyrocketed to nearly $100,000 a megawatt year. This is the highest the PJM market has ever cleared, creating the most favorable environment for demand response participation in years. Folks that participate in DR next year can earn record amounts of revenue from this program by strategically reducing their energy demand when called on. And there are two sub-regions I'd like to point out that's where prices rose even higher than the RTO prices we were just looking at. So the first is Baltimore Gas and Electric, or BGE in Maryland. The second is Dominion, or DOM, in Virginia and North Carolina. You can see in the chart on this slide the difference in prices between the current delivery year and next year, 25-26. These two zones cleared just short of their reserve requirement and happen to be transmission constrained zones, which caused prices to jump higher than in RTO. Now, what I mean by transmission constrained zones is that it's challenging to get enough power to electricity users in these areas, due largely to infrastructure inadequacies. There isn't enough generation locally in these areas to meet demand. Similarly, there's a lack of sufficient physical transmission lines to bring power in from elsewhere. In BGE specifically, some large-scale generators are scheduled to be retired going into next year, meaning there isn't going to be as much power created locally. Given the transmission issues here, PJM isn't comfortable they can ensure grid reliability with their remaining reserve power cushion, so prices have gone up to incentivize new local generation. Dominion, on the other hand, the change is coming from a demand side increase. There has been extensive growth recently in that zone with data farm and data center construction. Now, these are energy intensive facilities that once again are reducing the buffer PJM likes to have between their demand and supply forecasts. Now, if your business is located within these two zones, your reward potential for DR participation is unlike anything we've seen before in these regions. So, why'd this happen? There are three main factors we'll talk about today that combine to create these high prices, and they're tied to reductions in PJM's reserve margins. Now, as I mentioned a couple times already, reserve margins are essentially a buffer to make sure there's enough power to go around when needed, especially during extreme weather events. Now, for the 25-26 year, they've shrunk from about 20.5% to 18.5%, the lowest margin in over 10 years. Now, in years past, PJM has secured capacity well above their reserve margin, but now are uncomfortably close to their installed margin target, or it's sort of the minimum margin they want to have at 17.8%. So we're just a hair less than a single percentage point above that right now. Now, this doesn't give PJM a lot of wiggle room. The closer they get to their minimum reserve margin, the more generation PJM decides it needs, and the higher pricing rises to entice more generation and flexible resources to come online. So let's dig into some of these factors, starting with generator deactivations. Okay. Now, PJM is facing a nearly 6.5 megawatt decrease in installed capacity as generators are either retiring or have signaled they will retire. Now, fossil fuel powered plants make up the majority of PJM's generation fleet, and many of these are reaching the end of their operational lives. We mentioned this briefly a few minutes ago as being a key point in BGE. These generation assets are also retiring faster than they can be replaced. There was an assumption that when these assets would eventually retire, they'd be replaced by renewable generators. However, those renewable generation assets haven't come online yet because they're stuck in the PJM interconnection queue, which is the process to get approval to tie into the grid and and have the power you generate, flow onto the grid. Now, this approval also has to happen before these plants can get constructed. There's something like 3,000 projects in the interconnection queue right now. 95% of them are renewable projects, but the PJM waitlist for approval is around about 5 years at the moment. So retiring plants and a long outlook for operable replacements have combined to create reliability concerns and a supply gap that PJM needs to fill. Next is increased demand. Electricity demand is expected to grow across the region, driven largely by domestic manufacturing growth, increased electrifications of homes, vehicles, and businesses. And as we mentioned is the case in Dominion, more data center development. Now, PJM's forecasted a peak load of about 154,000 megawatts for the 25-26 year, an increase of 3.2 thousand megawatts from this current year. That might not sound like much, but when secured supply has reduced and there isn't as large of a reserve margin as we're used to, every little increase in demand counts. This trend may also be a recurring theme in future auctions, as PJM's long-term forecast predicts significant demand growth over the next 15 years. And the third factor are the new accreditation rules. So the 25-26 BRA marks a change in how PJM models reliability risks and has applied a resource-specific accreditation rating called the Effective Load Carrying Capacity, or ELCC. The concept of an ELCC is not new. It's been around for years, in fact, but it's never been applied to all resources in such a way. This new ELCC framework allocates a value based on the resource generation type, essentially derating their megawatts contributed to the grid based on how that resource type has contributed to grid reliability in the past. And now Winter Storm Elliott was the main catalyst that prompted PJM to rethink this. If you recall, during Winter Storm Elliott, which was the storm on Christmas Eve, December 2022, gas lines froze from extreme cold, causing serious concerns about reliability since the gas plants making power couldn't unexpectedly. Now, PJM came to realize some assets in their fleet could not provide the reliability that they originally thought under circumstances like this. They came to the conclusion that they were over-crediting the megawatts these gas plants promised would be available. And as a result, PJM modified the accreditation rules for this auction and applied that resource-specific ELCC to all resource types, not just gas and not just DR, to account for how often that resource would actually be available to be able to provide the megawatts it was responsible for. And this change impacted the amount of supply that could be offered into the 25-26 BRA. If you take a look at these two tables on this slide, you can see that the ELCC rule change hits offered supply to the tune of something like 30 gigawatts. So for the purposes of this call, these new market rules boil down to there being a further decrease in available supply. So to bring it back around to what happened in this auction to make prices so high, supply side took a hit, both from the new ELCC rules and from generators retiring without ready, viable replacements. Demand is forecasted to increase markedly, and the resulting supply and demand equation is lopsided, chipping away at the PJM reserve margin, which they need in order to make sure the lights come on when we expect them to. And because of these inputs, the 25-26 BRA produced much higher capacity prices than we've seen before to encourage more generation to come online and entice more participants in load flexibility products like demand response. Now I'm going to hand it back off to Kate here, who's going to walk through the pricing forecast in the out years, and what we can take advantage of now.
Thank you, Ian. So given what we've discussed, and thank you again, I think Ian did a great job of walking through the kind of nitty-gritty details that we don't always know about, and it's good to get in and kind of get where everything lies and how we get to these numbers that, that are good right now. So what can we really expect moving forward? Next slide. So is this the new norm in PJM? Are these changes that we're seeing, is this going to be something that we're going to see often over time? Signs are generally pointing to yes. Again, the next auction for the 26-27 program year, mentioned it earlier, it's coming up in the next few months in December of this year. It's expected that there won't be much change to supply challenges that we're seeing that made the forecast for these 2025, 2026 auction rates. So reserve constraints will likely be tight in the next few years, causing prices to remain elevated. And the capacity market will be very sensitive to slight changes in supply. Per the article on the right, Morgan Stanley is projecting that prices will jump yet again. Programs like demand response will continue to be essential to providing a cost-effective way to balance the supply and demand on the grid, and also be profitable for companies to continue if they're already enrolled or begin participating in demand response. Next slide. Is your organization prepared? With these auction results for the 25-26 season, aside from just participating in demand response, organizations are going to see changes on their bills. Electricity consumers across all of PJM, which I assume most of you are, will pay $12.5 billion more for capacity. There was a recent report from the state's ratepayer advocate that in Maryland, for example, customers could see an increase in their bills anywhere from 2 to 24%, depending on locational deliverability area. Many organizations that I personally am already in discussions with daily, who are aware of these increases coming to their bills, are already showing interest in participating in demand response to mitigate the auction impacts of the increase on their bills. Next slide. So if you are not currently enrolled in demand response, there's no better time to enroll in demand response than now if you're not currently enrolled. Companies that are currently participating could earn record, or well, starting 25, 26, could earn record levels of revenue by strategically reducing portions or all of their demand when called on by the grid. Even more if you're in, like Ian stated earlier, the Dominion and BGE territories. So just to give you an idea of some examples of reduction plans, if you're not familiar, there's a wide variety of assets that can be leveraged in a flexible manner to reduce or shift your consumption for demand response. As you can see on the slide here, depending on your operations, some examples of reductions include heating and cooling, shutting down or shifting machinery processes, reducing chillers, and more in refrigeration processes, and simply reducing non-ancillary controls such as lighting. Some facilities choose to do a full shutdown to maximize their earnings. Well, it is an easy option if you have a compliant generator, which we would also have the ability to take a look at. While others might focus more on shedding smaller loads to minimize disruption to their operations, but ultimately still get involved in some of the revenue payback and also, as mentioned earlier, mitigate the risk of the higher bills. It's very important to make sure that you're working with a curtailment service provider who works for your specific operations, your specific industry, and that can ultimately help you maximize your earnings potential in the program. Next slide. On the other hand, if you're on this call and you currently are enrolled in demand response, it's absolutely time to consider increasing your current commitment. So I've talked to a lot of participants who have maybe held back on their curtailment in the past few years because pricing was just not what they've seen. It's certainly not as what we're seeing for next year. The juice just wasn't worth the squeeze. So with the new pricing, it really is a time to kind of look back at that strategy of your reduction plan and figure out if you are able to be more flexible and able to do more. So for a lot of these customers with the new BRA pricing, those hesitations of pricing being too low is no longer the case. And we can absolutely revisit that strategy and see where you might be able to move things around and be a bit more flexible. So just to give you a little guide, I would be asking myself as an organization some questions like, could you curtail more? What processes and assets can make that happen on site? Is automation an option? Like leveraging a BMS, building management system. Do you currently have a BMS where you could program your demand response participation to make life easier, a little bit more automated? Or would you be interested in installing either new BMS, an upgraded BMS, or a completely new one on site? Enel does have a specific financing mechanism currently in place where you get a no CapEx BMS installed and pay back your system with the offset of your DR revenue earnings. And we're absolutely open to discussing that with you if that's something that you're looking at. And I think at the end of the day, I would say that above all, you should absolutely be, whoever you're working with in terms of demand response, absolutely check in with your provider and make sure that you can be flexible with your current reduction plan and change that as you see fit. Next slide. With all of that being said, everyone wants to make sure that they're choosing a demand response partner that will ultimately help them hit those revenue goals while tailoring that plan specific to their operations. So choosing the right partner is ultimately essential for your success in the program. A few things that we would say make a good partner is you want your partner to understand the specific challenges and opportunities that your industry alone faces. For example, they should have an expertise in your operations and where you might be able to find flexibility and what we've seen with current existing customers who have found success. They should be able to tailor an energy reduction plan specific to your priorities, your strategies, and your operations. They should have your organization's best interest at heart. They should be transparent about your revenue earning potentials. Are you talking to somebody who might be overpromising? You don't want, with the way that the market and the BRA is going, and as we've seen, we do want to be conservative until we have those pricings in future years that are coming, starting, of course, like I mentioned earlier, in December. And lastly, they should absolutely demonstrate the experience required to help you maximize the opportunity. For instance, how did they perform during Winter Storm Elliott? I can tell you that we were one of the top performers, I think, if not the top performer in the Winter Storm Elliott as a curtailment service provider. Next slide. As I've said, I don't know how many times, but this is clearly a huge opportunity in PJM at this moment, and it's important to work with a provider that you trust with your operations. It's important to work with a provider who has the experience that Enel has. Enel has several years of experience and expertise to be that provider for your business. The data and the numbers say it all. Just to give you a few examples, we have partnered with organizations in the PJM market since 2006, and we have a portfolio of over more than 3,000 customers in this region. We have a large demand response obligation in PJM as a result of the 2025-26 Base Residual Auction results. So we have a lot of opportunity to offer to customers. And just as a testament to our preparedness and the value we deliver to the grid and our customers, our portfolio, and I know that I mentioned this early in the slide before, not giving you the numbers, but our portfolio performed at about 130% during Winter Storm Elliott, which, as Ian mentioned, was December, Christmas Eve of 2022. Next slide. So at the end of this webinar, what can we do now to take these next steps? What can you do now with the updated pricing results? As a reminder, these high auction rates are exciting for demand response, but the capacity charges will be rising on your bill starting June 1st, 2025. Enrolling in the 25-26 program year which you should start considering now as a mark before the end of the year, which starts, the program year starts June 1st of next year, as well as if you could get enrolled in that for demand response, that starts June 1st, as well as help alleviate those rising bills with the new high rates in the program that we discussed today. So a couple things that we can do to start right after this call is reach out to the Enel team at resources@usca.enel.com to understand how participating in demand response can be a revenue opportunity for your organization. It is important to reach out now before space runs out. As mentioned, this is I actually don't even think I mentioned this earlier, but if you are aware, it is a first come, first serve program. So it is important that if this is something that you want to get enrolled in for the 2025-2026 season, it is time to start considering your options and looking at revenue potential and benefits. Key dates for new pricing rules to be implemented June 1st, 2025. So while we did just have those exciting auction results, that will start June 1st, 2025. You do not want to wait until the last minute to lock down your capacity. You want to be 100%. You want to make sure that you're 100% confirmed with your reduction plan and secure and lock down your spot in the market. And from there, I am going to pass it back to Tyann.
Thank you so much, Kate and Ann, for the wonderful presentation. I know I learned a few things about the PJM auction results, and I know that our listeners did as well. So we do have a few minutes for some Q&A. Kate and Ann are joined by colleagues from our energy market and customer support team who are prepared to answer any questions you have about the topics we discussed today. So please, if you have any questions, make sure to go into the platform under questions and submit those now. We did have a few questions come in before and during the presentation. So the first one was, what are all the different types of auctions that occur within PJM, and how does each impact customers' costs?
Hi, I can take that one. Hi, everyone. My name is Angie, and I am in our energy markets team. I think that we had a slide that kind of went over that, but basically everyone that wants to play in the PJM market has to participate in some way, shape, or form in the BRA auction. There are some other auctions that are available that are incremental. They're called incremental auctions, where also other participants might be able to buy and sell, but pretty much everyone that will want to secure any sort of capacity for the relevant delivery year will have to bid in to the BRA.
Awesome, thanks, Angie. The second question that came in was, given the supply concerns, can we expect more DR dispatches?
Hello, everyone. My name's Quincy, and I'm on the account management team. I'm happy to take this question. I have a couple thoughts on this one, and really, ultimately, the answer is maybe. We're unsure if these supply constraints are going to lead to an increased frequency of emergency events. But for context, prior to Winter Storm Elliott in 2022, before that, the last emergency event we had seen was almost 10 years prior to that. So just to put it in context, emergency events are quite rare for demand response. One thing to mention that PJM has implemented a new trigger for demand response dispatches, where they can now occur in advance of a true emergency event actually happening. And really, ultimately, this is to hopefully prevent us from reaching that true emergency scenario. So there is this new trigger that PJM has implemented. that could indicate in the future an increase in emergency dispatches. Just to note for that new trigger, that is a penalty-free mechanism. One last thought there is, even if we do see an increase in demand response dispatches in the future, which we're unsure of at this point, whether you're in DR or not, these events are going to occur. And by participating in this program, you can ensure that you are protecting your equipment, ensuring reliability, and that you're ultimately earning revenue for your efforts. So really, even going forward, if there are more events, participating in demand response will be all that much more important going forward. If anyone has anything to add to that, please feel free.
Oh, that covers it. Thanks, Quincy.
Thanks, Quincy. So the third question we got in was, since supply took a hit due to rule changes like ELCC, do we expect rates to remain, D-rates to remain in place?
I'll take that one. Yes, so as we talked about during the slides, there is a pretty, there's a new rule in place that is called the ELCC that derates all demand response resources. So regardless of your CSP, every single demand response resource has been hit with these derate. And unfortunately, as the rules stand now, it will continue to be there. One thing that Enel is doing is it's actively engaging with PJM within the stakeholder process to make them understand the value of demand response, which was, as we also mentioned, really valuable during Winter Storm Elliott, and proves the value of demand response when there are grid emergencies, and hoping to show PJM that we deserve a higher rating. So that's something that I'm personally actively engaging with PJM on pretty much on like a weekly basis. And it is an effort that Enel is leading on behalf of our customers as well.
Awesome, thanks, Angie. Another question that came in was, what will be the estimated payment per megawatt reduction for the 25-26 curtailment program?
I can take that. I'm Jamie. I'm on the support team. So PJM payments they're determined at the end of the delivery year. Obviously, with these rates being super high for the upcoming delivery year, that's definitely going to increase the amount that you're going to make. It definitely depends on your site's nomination, your performance over, if it's an audit, if it's an emergency dispatch. So any underperformance is definitely going to impact that payment, but every site is definitely different. But I think the main thing that we want to focus on is that these rates are really nothing like we've seen before. So it's really important to capitalize on those.
Awesome, thanks, Jamie. Another one that we have is, does this change the economics around new battery storage as a DR resource?
I can take that one. I'll try to take that one. Yes, basically, if you are looking to install a battery and you are able to curtail or participate in demand response using a battery, or use it also to reduce your capacity charges, which again will be will be much higher given the new rates. It will probably increase your payback period, as you will be able to make more demand response earnings using your battery, and you will be able to save more in your capacity charges. Again, every battery storage is different, and it depends on the particulars of your site. But given the astronomical pricing that we've seen, you should be able to, depending on how you want to use that battery, make up the investment quicker.
Thanks, Angie. Another question we got in was, we have on-site generation that can put about 2 megawatts on the grid when we do demand response, but we only get credited going to zero usage because of the type of meter you put in our substation. Is there a way to get credit for the generation we put into the grid during a demand response event or annual test?
I can take that one too. Sorry, let me spend a little bit of time reading it. So yes, if you are like exporting onto the grid, we should be able to get it. If we, for some reason, believe that the metering that we have on site is not properly capturing your contribution to the grid, what we normally do is we actually go to your utility and ask for utility grade data in order to make sure that our data is correct and is, again, properly capturing everyone's contribution to the demand response event or the test. So if you have any issues with the way that we are, that your data looks, you're able to log into our platform, see what your data looks like, and if it looks in any way, shape, or form incorrect to you, you can talk to our support team and we will take a look. And if we are not able to correct it on our end, we will absolutely go to the source of truth, which is your utility, and make sure that we properly value that contribution.
All right, next question was, what about reducing plant load during the PJM peak load days to reduce next year's capacity billing? Sorry.
I'm happy to take this one, Tyann. This is a great question. So for peak shaving activities, the one thing to just be cognizant of if you do want to participate in peak shaving to reduce the capacity charge on your utility bill is that ultimately that could result in a decline in the baseline that is used in the demand response program and could constrain the amount that you're able to participate in demand response for. Ultimately, your baseline is decided by looking at your demand across the peak days from the previous summer. So if you're curtailing your electric usage on those peak days, that could have a negative result on the baseline. That being said, there may be instances where peak shaving might be more advantageous than demand response, but if you want to get in touch with us at Enel, with an account manager or the support team, we can help you give you the information on estimated earnings for next year so that you can have those internal discussions about whether peak shaving or demand response might make more financial sense for you in the long run.
Thank you, Quincy. So the next question we have is, as demand response is for electricity, are there also these programs for other energy sources such as gas?
Hi, I'm Drew. Work in support and account management. It's a great question. It's not something we personally do, but there are demand response programs for natural gas. If that's something that we could help get you in touch with or give you a little information on, we'd be happy to do that. So feel free to reach out to our support team and we'll point you in the right direction.
Awesome, thanks, Drew. Another question we have is, when will this year's annual test be scheduled for?
I can take that, or Drew, do you want to take that? Basically, the way that the program rules work for PJM, they have to audit an entire zone at once, so we don't get a lot of control or can't really pick those days. When you get tested, you will get a 2-week audit window that'll basically say from this date to this date you could be tested within these days. The day before, you'll get a notification saying, hi, you're going to be tested tomorrow. And then on the day of, depending on your lead time, Some people do qualify for a lead time exemption, but the majority of our customers get 30 minutes. So the annual test isn't really something that we can predict. We're kind of at the mercy of PJM with that, but we're always here to help. And if you have any questions in terms of timing or updating site contacts to make sure that the right people are notified, always reach out to our support team, and we're happy to help with that.
Awesome.
Just to add on to that quick, Jamie, one thing that I always like to make sure people are aware of is that starting last year, PJM did implement new rules surrounding the audit where they intend to flip-flop the season that you're audited in from year to year. So say last year, your audit occurred in a summer month, which in the program that's from June to October. You can expect that the following year you would be audited in a winter month. So while we don't have a precise indication on what day your audit might fall, this can at least give you an indication on what time of the year that you can expect your audit to occur from year to year.
Great, thanks, Jamie and Quincy. I think that is all the questions we have for today. So thank you so much for attending today's webinar. Thank you to our speakers, Kate and Ian, for sharing their expertise with everyone today, and of course to our panel as well for their support during the Q&A session. We'll be sending all participants a recording of today's webinar along with responses to any additional questions you may have after the webinar. Please look out in your inbox for that email. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.